It was the summer before my freshman year of college, and my parents had decided to take a last-minute trip out of town. They left me in charge of the house for the weekend, something I'd been begging them to trust me with for months. I didn't have any wild party plans, just a couple of friends coming over for pizza and movies. But by the time the sun had set, my friends had bailed one by one, leaving me alone in the big, empty house. I tried to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. I wasn't a kid anymore. At 18, I should have been able to handle a quiet night alone. So, I grabbed a bowl of popcorn, queued up a show I'd been meaning to watch, and settled into the couch in the living room. It was around 9 p.m. when I first noticed something odd. The porch light outside flickered briefly before going out entirely. I frowned. It had been working fine earlier that day. Shrugging it off as a burnt-out bulb, I went to the kitchen to grab a flashlight from the junk drawer. The house was eerily quiet as I walked through it, my footsteps echoing against the hardwood floors. When I returned to the living room, I glanced out the window at the now-dark porch. Something about the blackness beyond the glass made my skin crawl, but I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, nothing bad ever happened in our small suburban neighborhood. An hour later, as I was halfway through my second episode, I heard a soft noise. It wasn't loud, just a faint scraping sound, like something brushing against the siding of the house. I muted the TV and listened. The sound came again, this time from the backyard. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed the flashlight and headed to the sliding glass door that led to the patio. The yard beyond was bathed in shadows, the glow from the neighbor's porch light barely illuminating the edge of the fence. I stepped closer to the glass, shining the flashlight into the darkness. At first, I didn't see anything, but then I caught it, a faint movement near the fence, like a shadow darting out of view. My breath hitched. It could have been a stray cat, or maybe even the neighbor's dog, I told myself, but something about it didn't feel right. I locked the sliding door and closed the curtain, telling myself not to overthink it. By midnight, I was starting to relax again. The earlier noises hadn't repeated, and I chalked it up to my imagination. I decided to head upstairs and call it a night. As I reached the top of the stairs, I glanced toward my parents' bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was slightly open, which struck me as odd since they usually kept it closed. I hesitated, staring at the darkened room. My gut told me not to go in, but I couldn't ignore the nagging thought that maybe I'd left it open earlier without realizing it. Forcing myself to move, I walked slowly toward the door and pushed it open wider. The room was empty, just as it should have been. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I checked the windows to make sure they were locked, then turned off the light and closed the door behind me. As I walked back toward my own room, I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps coming from downstairs. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The steps were slow and deliberate, moving across the living room floor. I strained to listen, hoping I was imagining things. But then I heard another sound, the unmistakable creak of the bottom step on the staircase. Someone was in the house. I bolted into my bedroom, locking the door behind me. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered quickly, her calm voice a stark contrast to my panicked breathing. I explained the situation, whispering that someone was in my house. She told me to stay quiet and that officers were on their way. As I sat on the floor next to my bed, clutching my phone like a lifeline, I heard the footsteps growing closer. They reached the top of the stairs and stopped. My heart felt like it might burst out of my chest as I waited, barely daring to breathe. The doorknob rattled. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. Whoever was on the other side of the door tried to turn the knob again. Harder this time. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying the lock would hold. After what felt like an eternity, the rattling stopped. The footsteps retreated, moving back down the hall. I listened as they descended the stairs, each creak of the wood sending a fresh wave of terror through me. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours, before I saw the flashing red and blue lights outside the window. Relief washed over me as I heard the sound of a car door slamming and voices calling out. I unlocked my door and hurried downstairs to let the officers in. They searched the house thoroughly, checking every room, closet, and crawl space. The back door was unlocked, though I was certain I'd locked it earlier. One of the officers found muddy footprints leading from the patio into the house. They circled through the kitchen, the living room, and the staircase before stopping at the top of the stairs. Whoever had been in the house had vanished without a trace. The police stayed for a while, asking me questions and reassuring me that they'd patrol the area for the rest of the night. But even after they left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I locked every door and window, checked every corner of the house, and still couldn't calm my racing thoughts. I spent the rest of the night curled up on the couch with the lights on, jumping at every creak and groan the house made. When my parents came home the next morning, I told them everything. They were skeptical at first, but the muddy footprints and the shattered sense of security in our once safe neighborhood were impossible to ignore. For weeks after that night, I couldn't sleep without checking every lock in the house at least 3 times. Even now, years later, I still get chills thinking about it. The police never found out who had been in the house or how they got in. All I know is that someone was there, walking through the darkened halls of my home while I cowered on the other side of a flimsy wooden door. And sometimes, when I'm home alone, I swear I can still hear the creak of those footsteps on the stairs. It was a cold October evening when my parents announced they were heading out for a charity event downtown. They wouldn't be back until late, and I wasn't invited because, as they put it, it's not exactly your scene. I didn't argue. At 17, I was perfectly fine spending a Saturday night at home. My plan was simple: order a pizza, binge a few horror movies, and maybe hop on a video call with my best friend later. The house was eerily quiet after my parents left, the kind of silence that feels almost unnatural. It wasn't unusual for me to be alone at home, but something about that night felt off. Maybe it was the chilly wind rattling the windows, or the dim orange glow of the streetlights outside casting shadows on the walls. I tried to shake off the uneasiness and focused on the TV. By the time the pizza arrived, I had already queued up my first movie, a slasher classic that felt fitting for the season. The delivery driver was an older man with a friendly smile, and his casual "enjoy your night" was the last normal moment of the evening. About halfway through the movie, I heard the faintest noise, like a soft knock, coming from somewhere in the house. I paused the TV, straining to hear. The sound didn't repeat, so I brushed it off as the wind. Still, I couldn't shake the prickling sensation crawling up my neck, as if someone were watching me. The movie ended, and I switched to a lighter, less intense show to shake off the paranoia. That's when I heard it again. The soft knock, this time more deliberate. It was coming from the back of the house, near the laundry room. My first thought was that maybe the wind had blown something against the window, but as I got up to check, I realized the laundry room window wasn't visible from where I was. I would have to go deeper into the house to see it. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight as I made my way down the hallway. The floor creaked beneath my feet, and the knocking came again. 3 steady, measured taps. My stomach tightened. Something felt wrong. I hesitated outside the laundry room door, debating whether to open it. Finally, I took a deep breath and swung the door open. The room was empty, bathed in pale moonlight streaming through the small window. I stepped inside, my flashlight bouncing off the walls, and checked the window. It was closed and locked. There was no sign of anything outside. Relieved but still uneasy, I headed back to the living room. Just as I was about to sit down, I heard another noise, this time from the front of the house. It wasn't a knock but a sharp scraping sound, like metal dragging against wood. My heart skipped a beat. The front door. I crept toward the door, peeking through the peephole. Nothing. The porch was empty, and the street outside was deserted. I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering over the lock. Should I open it? What if someone needed help? But my gut told me to leave it shut. I decided to call my best friend, Lily. She picked up after a couple of rings, her voice cheerful. "What's up?" I think someone's outside," I whispered, clutching the phone tightly. "Someone? Like who?" "I don't know. I keep hearing noises, but I don't see anyone." Lily paused. "Do you want me to come over? I can call my dad to drop me off." "No, it's fine," I said quickly. "It's probably nothing. Maybe the wind." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. We chatted for a few more minutes, and Lily offered to stay on the line with me, but I assured her I'd be okay. Hanging up, I felt a pang of regret. The house felt too big, too empty. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking each one, and returned to the couch. I tried to focus on the TV, but every little creak of the house set my nerves on edge. Then, just as I started to calm down, I heard it again. The knock? But this time, it wasn't coming from a window or the door. It was coming from inside the house. I froze, my pulse pounding in my ears. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing from upstairs. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like lead. Slowly, I reached for my phone and dialed 911, whispering my situation to the operator. They assured me an officer was on the way and told me to stay put, but I couldn't just sit there. What if someone was upstairs? What if they came down? I grabbed the closest thing I could use as a weapon, a heavy lamp from the side table, and crept toward the staircase. I could hear faint shuffling sounds, like someone moving around. My heart was racing as I climbed the stairs, my grip tightening on the lamp. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from my bedroom at the end. The door was ajar, and I could see the faint glow of my bedside lamp. I knew I hadn't left it on. I stopped outside my room, straining to hear. The shuffling had stopped, replaced by silence. Slowly, I pushed the door open, holding the lamp above my head, ready to strike. The room was empty, but something was wrong. The closet door, which I always kept closed, was slightly open. My stomach dropped. I stepped closer, my breath hitching. Just as I reached out to pull the door open, I heard a loud crash from downstairs. The lamp slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. I bolted down the stairs, my adrenaline spiking. The living room window was shattered, shards of glass scattered across the floor. A cold breeze blew through the room, and the front door was wide open. I ran to the door, peering out into the night. The street was still empty, the silence almost deafening. Red and blue lights appeared in the distance, and I felt a wave of relief. The police arrived moments later, 2 officers stepping out of the car. They searched the house thoroughly, but there was no sign of anyone. They speculated that it could have been a prank or an attempted break-in, but nothing was missing, and no one could explain the noises I'd heard inside. The rest of the night was a blur. I stayed at Lily's house, too shaken to be alone. My parents were furious when they found out what happened, blaming themselves for leaving me alone. But even after the broken window was repaired and life returned to normal, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever, or whatever, had been in the house that night wasn't just trying to scare me. They had been watching, waiting, and sometimes, late at night, when the wind rattles the windows just right, I swear I can still hear those knocks. It was a quiet Wednesday evening, and I was home alone for the first time in a while. My parents had gone out to celebrate their anniversary at a fancy restaurant a couple of hours away, and my younger brother was staying over at a friend's house. I thought I'd take advantage of the rare solitude to binge some true crime documentaries and order takeout. The house felt emptier than usual without the sound of my brother's constant gaming or my mom's television dramas playing in the background, but I figured I'd enjoy the peace. The night started uneventfully. I sprawled on the couch, scrolling through Netflix, finally settling on a documentary about a cold case from the 90s. The glow from the TV was the only light in the room, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls whenever the screen flickered. Every so often, I'd catch myself glancing at the window, half expecting to see a face staring back. It was irrational, I knew, but there was something unnerving about being alone in a house that felt too still. The sound of my Uber Eats driver pulling into the driveway gave me a brief sense of comfort. I stepped outside to grab the bag and thanked the driver quickly, eager to get back inside. There was a chill in the air, and the quiet suburban street seemed unusually deserted. Normally, I would hear the distant hum of cars or the faint chatter of neighbors, but tonight, it was like the world had gone silent. Shaking off the strange feeling, I locked the door and returned to my couch, balancing the bag of greasy Chinese food on my lap. Around 10 p.m., I paused the show to grab a soda from the fridge. As I walked through the dimly lit kitchen, I noticed something strange. The sliding door that led to our backyard was slightly ajar. I distinctly remembered locking it earlier, and I felt my stomach drop. My hand instinctively tightened around the soda can as I stared at the door. I hesitated, my eyes scanning the dark backyard. The porch light was on, illuminating the empty space, but the woods beyond loomed like an impenetrable black wall. I tried to dismiss my unease, convincing myself that maybe I hadn't latched the door properly. It was an old door with a temperamental lock, and sometimes it didn't catch if you didn't push it hard enough. I closed it, this time double-checking the lock, and returned to the couch. But my focus was gone. The true crime documentary, once engrossing, now felt too close to home. I kept glancing back toward the kitchen, my ears straining for any unusual sounds. Then I heard it, a faint, deliberate tapping at the back door. I froze, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. For a moment, I thought I imagined it. But then it came again, 3 slow, rhythmic taps. My mouth went dry. Summoning all my courage, I tiptoed to the kitchen, staying out of sight of the door as much as possible. When I finally peeked around the corner, I saw nothing. Just the same empty porch and the dark woods beyond. Trying to shake off the growing dread, I convinced myself it could have been a tree branch brushing against the glass or an animal. Still, the rhythm of the taps didn't seem natural. I returned to the living room, turned up the volume on the TV, and tried to focus. But the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. Half an hour later, my phone buzzed. I nearly jumped out of my skin before realizing it was just a text from my mom checking in. I quickly replied, telling her everything was fine, but as I was typing, something caught my eye. A shadow moved across the living room window. I froze mid-sentence, staring at the window, waiting for the shadow to appear again. It didn't. Panic started to creep in. I debated calling someone. But who? My parents were too far away, and I didn't want to seem paranoid. So instead, I did what any rational person would do. I armed myself with the nearest object I could find, a heavy glass paperweight from the coffee table, and went to investigate. I checked every room on the first floor, turning on all the lights as I went. The kitchen, the dining room, the study, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Just as I was about to head upstairs, I heard a noise from the basement, a muffled scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. I stopped dead in my tracks. Our basement door was locked, and the only other way in was through a small ground-level window at the back of the house. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Gripping the paperweight tightly, I crept toward the basement door. I pressed my ear against it, straining to hear. Silence. After a few minutes, I convinced myself that I was being ridiculous. But as I turned to walk away, the sound came again, louder this time. My blood ran cold. There was no mistaking it now. Someone was in the basement. I backed away, my hands trembling as I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. My voice shook as I whispered to the operator, explaining that I was home alone and someone was in my house. They assured me that an officer was on the way and told me to stay on the line. I locked myself in the bathroom upstairs, clutching the paperweight like my life depended on it. Minutes felt like hours as I sat there, trying to control my breathing. Then I heard it, the creak of the basement door opening. My heart sank. Whoever was down there was now in the house. The operator must have heard the change in my breathing because she asked me what was happening. I whispered that I could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, and coming up the stairs. She told me to stay quiet and that the police were almost there. The footsteps stopped right outside the bathroom door. I covered my mouth, tears streaming down my face as I tried not to make a sound. Then the doorknob rattled. I bit down on my lip to stifle a scream. The rattling stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then I heard heavy, retreating footsteps. A few minutes later, the sound of sirens filled the air. I stayed put until the police arrived and announced themselves. They found the back door wide open, and muddy footprints led from the basement stairs to the backyard. Whoever had been in the house was long gone. The police searched the property but didn't find anything, though they suspected the intruder had been hiding in the basement for hours, waiting for the right moment to come upstairs. The thought still sends shivers down my spine. I often think back to that night and wonder what might have happened if I hadn't called 911 in time. Would they have found me hiding in the bathroom? Or worse, would I have come face to face with whoever was in my house? Even now, I can't sit in a quiet house without feeling like someone is watching. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint rustle of wind against the windows. It all takes me back to that night. And while the intruder never returned, the fear they left behind never really went away.